Welcome back to another episode of Sweatin' Bullets, a fantasy football podcast. I'm your host, DF Beancounter. You can follow me on Twitter at DF Beancounter. With me today and always is Jacob Sanderson. You can follow him on Twitter at Jacob Sanderson. How are you doing? It's
I'm
like a Tuesday night. It's late. Like I should be in bed, but here we are.
It's we always record late. I mean, between being on the West Coast and you seemingly having these children that you're always doing stuff with, and me generally being a person of the PM, late recording, 9:43 p.m. over here in the West Coast. And we're going to talk a little bit about the 2023 fantasy season today. We're going to talk about projections, which is a thing that I do now. Drew used to do. Yeah, exciting times.
So, projections.
Drew's slacking off. I'm putting in the work.
It's not slacking off. It's, I'm not going to say bad things about projections now that you've started doing projections. So you go ahead and...
No, I'll say bad things about them.
Tell the world why you would do projections for fantasy football when we know with 100% certainty that they're wrong.
So it is interesting that I did projections. I'm like known in the Bulletproof Discord for constantly deriding projections. Pretty much any time that I have a take and then someone's rebuttal to that take is, but Mike Clay's projections say this, I start like furiously typing like that cat in the GIF because it bothers me. I think when people rely on projections as some form of gospel, to the point that when I release my projections on my Substack, Thinking About Thinking, jacobsanderson.substack.com, I released it with the title Projections Overview and the subtitle, I've succumbed to the projection industrial complex, and I'm going to tell you why they're probably going to do more harm than good. And that's generally my attitude about projections. There's a few issues I have with them, and I don't think that means that they're useless or that people shouldn't do them. Obviously, I just spent a lot of hours doing them, but I do think that they can do more harm than good if taken without context. And the reasons for that are, first of all, fantasy football isn't really a median game. Like the way that most people are doing projections is you're trying to capture what you think is a reasonable or likely median scenario. And to do that, even if you do it really well, isn't actually ordering your players in the way that you necessarily want to draft them for fantasy. So if you're simply taking your projections and making those your rankings, I think you would probably be better off simply drafting players in their exact order off of ADP than their exact order off of even a good set of projections. Because generally, when the ADP is ahead of a player versus projection, or they're behind a player versus projection, I think what the ADP is usually telling us is something fairly wise. They're telling us that, this player is probably about the maximum right now of what they've shown of what we can actually expect. They don't necessarily have a lot of room to grow. So we're going to price them down into round 5 when they might project like they're in round 4. Or this player, we don't really know what their role is going to be. They're in a really ambiguous situation, but we believe in this talent profile. So we're going to move this player up around versus how they're projected. You look at some of the running back dead zone research, and I cited this in the piece. An interesting element to the running back dead zone that Ben Gretsch just pointed out is this idea of the wisdom of the crowds, where historically the worst picks in the running back dead zone tend to be players that have already produced at a starting level that are then being drafted in the middle rounds, because effectively the market is saying, this guy just isn't very good. Like we've seen all that we need to see and we're not that interested. Versus the players that have tended to hit out of that dead zone tend to be rookies, players in potentially new roles, players in ambiguous situations where the market is saying, we don't know what this player is going to be. We can't project them necessarily what the touches are going to be, but we're intrigued enough about the talent of this bet. And those tend to be those middle round picks that pay off more often than the projectable volume picks. So those are kind of all the reasons why I think projections are bad. Each of those can only get compounded if the projections are then inaccurate, right? Even if the projections are accurate and good, I think they can cause a lot of harm. Imagine if they're terrible. And with all that said, why I think they're a worthy exercise is the process of doing them. I think that the actual output of the projections is a fairly limited value. All it tells you is a snapshot of one person's subjective view of one potential scenario within a range of outcomes. And ideally, that scenario is a fairly reasonable one, somewhere towards the median. But it doesn't give you the whole picture of the range of outcomes that we're drafting. And that's what we're drafting, is a range of outcomes for these players. And I do think that doing the projections helps paint you that picture. You start to do a team, right? And I'll use an example of the 49ers.
Don't do that team.
Why?
I don't know. They're boring.
Oh, okay.
Do the Chargers.
Okay, well, they're not necessarily the best example for what I'm talking about.
I was trying to pigeonhole you. Do the 49ers. Do the 49ers. They're great.
Okay. 49ers are always the perfect team to use in this example, which is the way that my process generally is I'll use this for wide receivers as the example here. First, I try to be like, okay, how many routes do I think each of these wide receivers are going to run? And then I look at, okay, roughly how many targets do I think this player earns on a per route basis? And then we produce the target shares out. And ideally, I have a little bit left for overflow at the end for players that I'm not actually projecting, because I don't project every single player on the 53-man roster. Some teams like the 49ers, I wind up and I do that first run and I get like -5 in my overflow, because all these players earn more target share in a vacuum and they're capable of earning together on that team. And other teams like the Panthers, it's the opposite. It's like I go through it, I'm like, this is what DJ Chark earns. This is what Thielen earns. This is what Marshall earns. This is what Mingo's going to earn.
And then what you're saying is that it's possible that these wide receivers are just walking around picking up targets laying on the ground. They're vacated. Somebody has to catch the ball. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly
It's possible you're saying that.
But right. So we talked about this idea of this vacated targets thing. And honestly, this is where projections, I think, are actually an interesting exercise. Is people often talk about this idea of the vacated targets. A lot of targets available. This person's walking into targets. That's one of my favorite phrases. Walking into targets.
Yeah.
Right? It's like Regina George in Mean Girls. She walked into a bus. DJ Chark's walking into targets. Like they're just coming down the street. He's walking right into them. And you get to the situation where it's like, oh, I projected everybody for what I think they're worth in a vacuum, and I have like 13% target share left over. And that's obviously not going to work. So you kind of allocate it. And how does this work out over a team level? Well, everybody gets a little more than they'd earn in a vacuum, right? Whatever TJ Chark's target earning ability is on median NFL depth chart, he's going to earn more than that this year because the competition is lighter, a little bit more. Doesn't mean he's going to earn 24%, but he'll earn, it's like if he's worthy, I can't remember what I have in that, but let's say it's like his baseline target per run is 15%. Maybe this year he has 16.5%. That's possible. But what happens is this little bump gets equally distributed amongst all the main players. And then you just have a way higher proportion of targets going to tertiary players because they're probably going to rotate routes around more. They're probably going to throw more to running backs and tight ends. They're going to just keep bringing in new guys. Like they might sign guys midseason. They might be like, this guy sucks after 6 weeks and then put in a new guy. And what usually wind up happening is you get a situation like the Saints in the year that Thomas missed the whole season. And it was like, I don't think anybody had more than 18% of their target share, right? You think about the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence's first year. I think Marvin Jones led them in target share at 18 or 19% because everything just becomes diffuse. And then you see this opposite effect where, it's like pressurizing. I've used the example of like the diamond, right? The sand getting pressurized and becoming a diamond. However diamonds work, I don't really know exactly. But like with the 49ers or the Eagles are another great example. It's like because you kind of have to nerf the volume intake for each of these players because they're so good and they're all together, that they're probably going to become even more efficient because they're not forcing the balls off into these guys, right? They're getting it when they're in advantageous positions. They're getting a higher proportion of their first 3 targets. Oftentimes there's multiple guys open, so you're not forcing it to someone. And everybody plays a little bit above their station in terms of their efficiency. And you get the opposite in these other situations, right? The Patriots, the Panthers, it's like everybody's kind of efficiency has to go down because DJ Chark didn't magically become better at route running, because he's not a bad depth chart. Probably a lot of those extra targets are targets where he's not open and then nobody else is open. And they're like, okay, I guess I'll throw it to you. And then that becomes an incompletion or he gets tackled right away. Picking on Chark. I don't know why I'm picking on him in particular. I should pick on.
You can pick on someone else.
Okay, Juju Smith-Schuster.
You can pick on Juju Smith-Schuster. You could pick
Devontae
on
Parker.
Mecole Hardman filling in for Tyreek Hill last year. was destined, preordained from his draft year onward for like 17 consecutive years. It was going to happen, and then it happened, and it was 1-for-1 replacement.
Alan Lazard last year.
Alan Lazard was the Devontae Adams, like clear as day. Yeah, there's tons of these examples.
Right. So anyway, all that's to say, what is interesting when you do the projections is you do realize, like, okay, who has a lot of contingent value, because you're getting this pressurized environment, but also his projection might be bad. And ideally, you can balance these. Ideally, you can look at some players' ADPs and say, you know what, like this player is in a really tough spot. They need a lot of things to happen to be able to pay off with their ADP. And then you look at other players and it's like, okay, this player also has some of these same contingent value upside factors. There's other guys that are jamming up their targets, but they're a lot closer in price to their projection than this other guy. And, that's probably the guys you want to prioritize. And at the same time, you look at the environment, like the Atlanta Falcons are a great example of this, where it's like, okay, if you want to bet on Pitts in London, you kind of have to play this game of like, they don't project awesome, right? It's impossible to make them project awesome because of how low pass rate the Falcons were, and because I don't expect Desmond Ridder to be particularly efficient. But if you want to, and what I encourage everybody to do is, if you are thinking about things subscriber, is make a copy of the spreadsheet and play around with it. Just type in different numbers. But okay, hypothetically, if Desmond Ridder is good, what's the efficiency of this offense? Hypothetically, if they pass the league average rate, what does this offense look like? And start to build it out and see, like, okay, how high can I get this to where it's reasonable, and play out what's the 90th percentile outcome look like? What's the 95th percentile outcome look like? And I think that's the interesting part for me. It's the interesting part is like, okay, I'm in some spots, like I can't get this guy anymore, but I really want to. I'm getting this guy all that he can handle. I think that process of tinkering around and trying to figure out what needs to happen for players to hit or to miss at their ADP is the part of the doing projections is interesting. Even if I deleted all the outputs, I think just doing that process is what I mostly derive value from. And I hope that with the preamble that I wrote and people seeing that, they can derive a little bit more value from that process as well, and that way of thinking about things versus just looking and sorting by points per game.
Yeah, no, I when I say that projections are bad, I don't mean that they're like bad. I think that people often take them in an entirely wrong way. We're not drafting anyone based on their 50th percentile outcome. We're looking at where they're priced versus what their projection is, and then what can happen, what could change. So when you look at like I infamously or famously, depending on your stance on the matter, did a huge thread on DJ Moore and AJ Brown 2 or 3 years ago. And the crux of it was that AJ Brown was the wide receiver 1 overall in Dynasty at the time. And I was like, his projections do not line up with this. Like, a lot needs to change. He needs to jump like 5 percentage points in target share, or the Tennessee Titans need to like really ramp up the volume, which we've never seen them do in like the last decade. So this just doesn't make sense. Like, dude can ball is only so much analysis can go, or only so many points come from dude can ball. Like, dude can ball, sure, he will outscore what other guys will score in the same situation. But if his situation is so bad, it doesn't matter if he can ball. Or, well, it does, but it depends on where he's priced, right? If he's priced at wide receiver 1 and you're looking at it and you're like, this guy's probably going to score like 15, 16 points per game, that doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. Conversely, you look at DJ Moore and you're like, this guy's priced at wide receiver 15 and he's probably going to score 15, 16 points per game. Well, that's a lot more interesting then, because now we're talking about, well, what if the quarterback actually is okay? He's probably not okay, but that's priced in. If the quarterback was good, if he was playing with Aaron Rodgers, DJ Moore wouldn't have been wide receiver 15. He'd been wide receiver 3. And it's like that kind of like projection level that you need to understand in order to, I think, effectively navigate fantasy football drafts. And I think like doing the full scale projections is a really good exercise in helping you get familiar with that. And like Jacob said, I would, if you've never done it before, I would just jump in there and start messing around, because by the time you get like a player that is, playing for X team, and then you look at where he's being drafted, and then you look at where you think he's actually going to score, and you're like, well, okay, but how do we get him there? If that's something that's just like we've never seen it before, then I'm usually just not interested.
That is ultimately the thing. Like I care a little bit when we're talking about best ball drafts, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to be doing 400 best ball drafts. when I'm like, oh, Mike Williams comes out pretty good. Like, yeah, that interests me to like a point. But for the most part, what I'm using these projections for is like guys who I fundamentally believe on as talents. I'll use an example of like J.K. Dobbins is a good example of a player that I'm really interested on from a talent level, but I know he has concerns. And going through this exercise, I don't really care what the final number I landed on is, but I'm more just like I even spent time just tinkering around being like, okay, what if I change this? What if I change this? Like, how high can I get him until it's no longer reasonable? And I think like you play this game with any player that you want, right? Or similarly, I wouldn't even do it with like players that you're fading, because a lot of times players that you're fading, like if you're fading someone, then you don't really have to worry about the projection, because the answer to how does a player fail is they're bad and they don't play anymore. Right? That's usually the thing, right? It's like if you're like, oh my God, like I just can't, man, like Zay Jones projects too good. It's like, well, a certain point you can just say, yeah, but what if Zay Jones is bad? And then that changes the calculus, right? But absolutely, from like Seattle's another good example of this, right? I had a lot of fun on that sheet where I was like, all right, what is like the most likely scenario for Jackson Smith and Jigba? And then it was like, okay, now what would I do if I assume that they're going to go full Rams and they're now going to play an 11 personnel every snap? Okay, what would I do if I was to say DK Metcalf turns ACL and traded cap? What would I do if Tyler Lockett was to become not very good and, hit the age cliff and be more of like a wide receiver 3 level talent? Like you can play all around these games and see like, what is the upside on this player actually? Because a lot of times people just say indiscriminately, this player's got a high ceiling.
I was actually ranting about this in my car earlier today. I was like, people literally go out onto the internet and they're like, this guy has a good ceiling, high ceiling. And I'm like, based on what? What have we seen from this guy that suggests a high ceiling? You have no idea if that guy has a high ceiling because you're just saying it like with no substance. You're just like, he has a high ceiling. And I'm like, how do I even counter that? I don't even know what to say. Like, no, he doesn't. and that's the conversation. Like, if you're going to point out somebody's ceiling, in my opinion, you can do it. Do whatever you want. If I'm going to say somebody has a high ceiling, I'm going to show you this is how he gets to that ceiling. A, B, C happens. We're there. And then, or A, B, C, D, E, F, G happens, and then we're there. And I'm like, that's never going to happen. We're not hitting 6. I don't even know. I don't gamble. What do you hit on a slot machine? 6 bars? No, 6
3
cherries. Cherries are the good ones? 3.
Yeah, 3 cherries.
I don't gamble. Anyways, the point is you're not going to get a whole bunch of things. Like if it requires a laundry list of things to go right, then that's not a real bet. Just stop.
How many legs are in your parlay? Yeah. We had this conversation in the Discord where my DeAndre Swift projection is really low. To be fair, that's the case for most players in backfields where you can kind of project 3 players for roles. Like if a backfield has 3 players projected for roles and they have a mobile quarterback, the backfield's going to project like shit because I'm splitting carries 4 ways.
Kenneth Gainwell for a role, or is it someone else?
I certainly am projecting Kenneth Gainwell for a role.
Kenneth Gainwell.
He had a role last year. He had a role that neither of the other players play, which is a long down and distance role. I expect him to probably keep that role. But you might not. Kenneth Gainwell.
Like, we're talking about the guy from, where did he play again? Memphis? Tony Pollard's backup?
Did they overlap much? I don't know if they did much. I think he overlapped a little more with Gibson.
No.
But he was not the backup. He was the lead of the
wasn't he the bell cow?
Of the 4 Memphis boys, he was the best college player for sure. And the latest drafted somehow, which is kind of crazy. I guess
it's also the worst.
Darrell Henderson honestly is probably the worst at this point.
Okay, Darrell Henderson's probably the worst. Darrell Henderson was like the what do you call it? Like the lead horse though. Like he was the first guy. He paved the way for everyone else, didn't he?
Yeah, it was Hendo. I think Hendo and Pollard were in the same draft class, I want to say.
Oh yeah, but Pollard basically didn't get to
play. But Hendo and Gainwell actually played running back, and Pollard and Gibson were hybrid receiver running backs.
Okay, I'm curious. How many RB, let's call it 3s on an NFL team get 300 yards in a season?
Well, Okay,
is that a role, or is that just
this is projecting several different aspects of this, which the real answer is a lot. And the reason why is usually because RB1 or RB2 gets hurt. How many RB3s get 300 yards in a season without injuries to one or two? I would guess very few. But part of this issue is, so this is a fundamental issue in projection. So
maybe what the issue is you're projecting something that rarely ever happens.
So this is the issue. Well, Gainwell was effectively the RB3 last year.
And got 300 yards.
He had actually over 400.
Oh, that guy's good.
I mean, because he had a role, right? Like Boston Scott was effectively Miles Sanders' direct backup, and Gainwell had his own role. At least that's what it's been the last 2 years. So part of the issue with some of these situations is like it gets easier to project things when we have like a certain level of knowledge, where it's like, okay, Jaguars, I'll use an example. They were a very consolidated route team last year. Okay, so who's running the routes this year? Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram. They're going to run all of the routes. And the only way that other guys run routes is if one of them gets hurt. That's pretty projectable. Like they're always going to be the guys that are going to be running the routes. Chiefs couldn't fucking tell you. So it's like, do I actually project?
I'll tell you. It's Sky Moore.
So with the Chiefs is a great example. Like I think I gave like a not insignificant route share to like 6 different guys. Do I actually think that they're going to run a 6-man rotation? Probably not. But you kind of create this weird scenario where it's like, what should I do here? Should I, pick like the single most likely arrangement of what I think is going to happen and then just project full bore like that's going to happen? Or should I kind of hedge to some extent where it's like, do I actually think that, these guys are going to split this role 60-40? Or is it more, am I saying that there's like a 60% chance that this player is going to play 80%? There's a 40% chance this person's going to play 20%. Like you kind of end up in this weird zone where you're between medians and means. And I usually kind of wind up hedging. Point being, in spots like the Eagles are a great example, the Bears are a great example, and the Saints are a great example, backfield-wise, and the Dolphins, although they might even just sign Dalvin Cook and everything might be moved. Like these are backfields where currently 3 players are drafted in every single draft if you're doing best ball drafts. And I think that 3 players have like a pretty viable chance of earning a role. I also think by the time like week 10 rolls around, and if all 3 are healthy, one of them probably just doesn't have a role. But I don't necessarily know who that is. And also, one of them probably just gets hurt. So you're in this spot where nobody projects very well. Like in the Bears offense, I don't think I have anyone projecting at 10 points per game. I don't have any of the backs projecting at 10 points a game in the Eagles. I would be shocked if that actually happens. It's just, I don't really know how to consolidate it yet. We had a discussion about Swift. And yeah, I basically said, like, if you're a Swift fan and you want to paint the ceiling for Swift, go for it. Do exactly what I mentioned before. Like take the copy, change the other inputs. Is it you think the Eagles will run more more efficiently, run more efficiently, whatever, like team-wide changes? Look at that. If you think it's just in terms of the teams, like, okay, first thing you can do, you can say, I think Kenny Gainwell will have 0 role in this offense. And you can just give all of his carries and targets to Swift if you want to, right? You can do that. And then you can say, okay, now what's the output, right? Are we getting closer to where I want to draft him? Okay, closer. Okay, I think Swift's going to have more targets. Okay, easy enough to say in a vacuum. Where are the targets coming from? Like, are these coming from AJ Brown, Smith, Goddard, a little bit of everybody? Like, play out this game. I'm not saying you can't play this game. It's just this what I'm saying, right? This is one snapshot of my view on a scenario. And if you disagree on a certain player, play through this game and then show me how he gets there, right? I think this is how far wide ranging these are, especially in situations where a lot is uncertain. Right, a lot of uncertainty with the Eagles' backfield. They've never really had a player like Swift in it in the last couple of years. They only have 1 year of data really on how this backfield ran at like a full-on Hurts, AJ Brown, this iteration of this offense. They lost Sanders. They added Swift. They added Penny. Play it a lot of different ways, as far as I'm concerned. I think you could get Swift up to 14, 15 points per game. My question is what do you do? What's the effect on other guys? And if you're very certain about Swift, that's where your certainty lies. Might make you a little less interested in Goddard or Brown or Smith. Or I think it's also fun to look at certain situations, and you don't have to, like, people will do this all the time and say, well, if you're high on this guy, you have to be low on this guy. I disagree with that too. I think there's certain situations you can look at and say, I'm optimistic about the situation and it's ambiguous. And like the Ravens is an example of this. When I draft Rashad Bateman, I tell myself the story of how OBJ is old and dust and Zay Flowers is mediocre and Bateman consolidates all the wide receivers targets in the offense. And then when I draft Zay Flowers, I tell myself the story of how OBJ is old and dust and Bateman is forever injured and disappointing, and Flowers is going to be a stud rookie from day one, be the best wide receiver on the team. Like you can sell yourself on both of the stories, and both are plausible, and you don't have to carry over one assumption to the next guy. You can play into the ambiguity of it if you like the situation.
I think one of the other things I'll mention on this is with someone like DeAndre Swift, or like really any player, realistically, when we're talking about like these uncertain situations, what I often like to do is break it down to like a game rather than the whole season. Because yeah, DeAndre Swift probably isn't going to smash for the whole season. But what if Rashad Penny gets hurt for a game? And what does that look like? And then you're like, okay, what if Rashad Penny gets hurt the first game then? And it's like, okay, well, that's a lot more interesting. And then you just kind of like go through it on like a game by game basis, especially when you're talking about like this like contingent upside type players. Like AJ Dillon would be another one where you'd kind of look at it from that perspective, where it's like season long, yeah, he's probably not going to be great, but what happens if Aaron Jones gets hurt? Well, then I'm really going to like AJ Dillon.
I actually, you're going to make fun of me for this, but we argued a lot about the idea of AJ Dillon's standalone value last year, and it was kind of like a meme because I was really seeing it more in a best ball context than in a redraft context. And anyway, I actually think he might have standalone value this year.
In redraft or in best ball?
Well, definitely best ball. And I don't know if like value is the right word for it, but I think you could start AJ Dillon in the flex all year and not hit. I haven't projected 11.2 points per game. Mostly because I have Green Bay running a lot more and running more plays without Aaron Rodgers. And I have a pretty tight split between Jones and Dillon and carries. Obviously, Jones does way more of the receiving. But the other notable thing is like Dillon really did take over last year as the goal line back. He had, I think it was like 7-2 in touchdowns or something like that, rush touchdowns. So I do actually have AJ Dillon for standalone value of 11 points per game this year.
So then in a situation like this, you run the projections. You're like, yeah, no, I actually think like he's got actual standalone value. And then you're like, well, what happens if Aaron Jones gets hurt? Well, then I get the smash. So now I really want AJ Dillon when he's going in round, I don't know, 7 in redraft, 8. Where's he going in like a
AJ
redraft?
Dillon? Dillon's going to the 9th.
9th. So like last year he was going to like the 4th. This year he's going to the 9th. Now, when we're playing the game of what happens if we're getting a huge smash, whereas last year when you were playing the game, what happens if we're breaking even? So that's where I like come back on like projections are really valuable, but they're not in like you don't do the projection and then you're like, okay, sort the players, that's the order we'll pick them in. Like those are the guys who are going to score the most. What we're looking for is the 90th percentile outcome. What happens if something great happens versus where they're being priced?
What I would look at a lot for running backs too is like if you let's assume that you generally agree with my team level trends, which obviously you don't have to, but if you like look through and you're like, yeah, I think that the team level analysis is generally good, and so you work off of that assumption, or you choose not to look at my projections. You look at any projections that you like, whoever you think is doing a good job of team level projections. What I would encourage you to do for running backs especially, and especially like running backs once you get past the true we're playing every down workhorses available in the first couple rounds, focus a lot less on the projected points per game that I have for them individually, and a lot more on the team level running back points per game and on the skill sets that player has and the other players in the backfield. And it's fun when you look at AJ Dillon and you're like, I have a decent chunk of points projected for running backs in Green Bay because, for several reasons. I think they're going to run a lot. They tend to run efficiently, and they don't really have a lot of proven pass catchers. So you're probably going to have a decent target share going to running backs, especially they tend to use running backs at the goal line. So you get a lot of total running back points. And you look at it, it's like there's only 2 guys. Name for me a Green Bay running back that's not Aaron Jones or AJ Dillon without looking at the sheet.
The only guy I can think of is and I can't even remember his name, but there was I think it was a UDFA last year that I kind of liked that when it ended up going undrafted. Is he still with them? He didn't play at all last year. I think he got hurt.
UDFA.
I'm pretty sure maybe he's a 7th round pick.
Yeah, are you thinking of Kylan Hill? Kylan Hill got caught by them. He's now a free agent.
Okay. I don't know if maybe it was Kylan Hill. Kylan Hill was a Debbie darling, so maybe that's who it was.
Yeah, he was a big Debbie guy. He got caught. Anyway, Patrick Taylor is on the Packers, and he was like their 3rd running back last year. Patrick Taylor, I think, like received carries, and I want to say one game, and it was when both Green Bay running backs were injured. Otherwise, he just did not have a role. If the other 2 running backs were healthy, he had 0 role. And then they have Lou Nichols, who they got in the 7th round. So I don't know. One of those 2 is going to be like the 2nd back or the 3rd back, and they're going to have no role if the other 2 are active. So you think about it, it's like, all right, you subtract one of these players. How much of that total 25 running back points per game is this other guy walking into? And it's like probably a decent chunk, right? And okay, it probably reduces by a little bit, right? All of a sudden you don't have these 2 running backs. The total share of running back goes down a bit. So let's say that 25 comes down to 23, whatever. You project it out. And then you say, okay, well, now this 3rd back's going to need a little bit of something. This guy's going to need a Gatorade. But you can easily tell yourself, like, one of Dillon or Jones goes down, maybe the remainder gets 18 points per game. Like, you can tell yourself that story. Whereas you look at some of these backfields and it's like, oh, there's only 20 points per game available here. So even if one guy gets hurt, now how much can this guy walk into? What skills does the player have? The nice thing with A.J. Dillon is like he's not a great receiver, but he seems to be like a good enough receiver that like he could absorb targets. Like I don't think it's like we have to sub him out every time we try to pass. That's the issue with some of these backfields. Like we'll talk about with Chicago. It's like, contingent upside on Roschon Johnson, a little interesting. He could potentially play on all 3 downs. With Herbert, like that's a player I really love from a talent perspective. So I'd like to see the ceiling because I think he's really good. But it's like, even if I give him the role I give him, and I decide that Foreman has no role, I either say he's going to get hurt or I banish him by royal decree. It's like I give Herbert all the rushing. Still not playing any pass down. Even if Roschon Johnson got hurt, he's never playing a pass down. He can't do it. Fields taking all the rushing. It's like I can't really get him past like 14 points per game, which makes him like a best ball only pick for me, right? And you can do that with these certain running backs. You see like where is the ceiling? Does he have a high ceiling? Okay, what's the ceiling? It might be 13 points per game.
The other thing I'll mention is when looking at I don't know how you do your projections, but I've seen people where they back their way into a projection. I'm assuming you're not doing that because you're smarter than that. Well, they'll be like
by backing their way in.
AJ Brown's going to score 20 points per game because he's awesome. And they're like, how are you going to get there? And they're like, well, he's going to get, and then they like work their way back 30% of the targets. They're going to increase their pass attempts by 5 per game. And voila. It's like, well, that's not how it works, you buffoon. Like when you're doing projections like this, you always start at the team level with this team is going to have, 35 pass attempts per game and 23 rush attempts, or better yet, a range, right? Like I'm picking on the Titans because it's the one I talk the most about from the AJ Brown era. But like when you're looking at the Titans, it's like, okay, well, they have not exceeded 30 pass attempts per game in the last 10 years. So the range of outcomes here is pretty low. Like if we're going to get to 35, it's going to be a big outlier. And then how is that priced versus the market? The Lamar Jackson's another great example where after his like 3rd season, I think it was, I don't know, one of the seasons, everyone was like, they're definitely not going to pass the ball enough to make anybody relevant. It was like, okay, I agree. They are probably not going to pass the ball enough to make anybody relevant. That's so priced into this projection and this ADP that what happens if something unusual does happen? Well, then we get a huge freaking monster season out of Mark Andrews because he's going to have 26% of the targets. And if the pie grows, then everything grows for him. And that's not priced in that's an option. And I agree, it probably isn't an option most of the time in situations like that.
And they didn't even really want to pass that much. Like it compounded the factors. They started to pass more like an average team. And then they wound up in these games where they ran a million plays because they were playing from behind and they went to overtime a couple times. And it was like when you compound them wanting to pass a little more than we thought they would, and then them ending up in the situation where their actual pass rate way outpaces their expected pass rate, all of a sudden you get this double compounding scenario where they get lucky and they intentionally want to pass more and fireworks.
Yeah, so it's just like when you're looking at this, like don't lock into a singular outcome for the team level either. Like we're talking about with, wide receivers, they might get 23, 25, or 27% target share, and there's a range of outcomes for target share. And then at the team level, it's the same thing. Like they might have 30 pass attempts per game, 32 or 28, maybe if it's a low passing team. Or a mid-range team is going to be 33, 35, 37, or a high-end team is going to be 38, 40, 42. And you kind of like lock your teams into these like individual ranges, and then you lock the players into their individual ranges, and you have like a matrix, or at least that's how I do it, like a matrix where I'm looking at, okay, what happens if we pass a lot and the guy hits his ceiling? Individually, we get team level ceiling and player level ceiling mixed together. We have, bona fide top 5 wide receiver candidate. Okay, what happens if we get mid-level team projection and elite level or like 90th percentile outcome player level projection? Okay, well now we're talking top 12. And then you go to the bottom and you're like, what happens if we get terrible and terrible? Oh, we're still looking at a top 24 wide receiver? And he's priced at wide receiver 18? This is great. Draft this guy. And it's, like you just kind of balance the range of outcomes with a number of different scenarios. And like, obviously we're not going to be right 100% of the time, but it's so much a matter of the guy's probably going to be around here. This is how I do my dynasty rankings is I kind of lock the player into like this guy's a 16-ish points per game player. And that's based around, once we get the, year 3 data on a wide receiver, they kind of lock in a target share, plus 1 or 2 target target share percentage points. Like they're a 25% player. Okay, we might get 24 to 26. He's going to be somewhere in there. Or maybe it's a little bit bigger range if, the team situation has changed a lot and the guy's now alone on the depth chart or whatever. Now we're going 23 to 27 instead of 24 to 26, whatever. Like you kind of massage it to the narrative, hilarious as that is for me to say out loud for the masses to hear. But you kind of massage it to like what you understand of what's the rest of the team. Like we did the whole projection.
By the way, massage to the narrative. That's our episode title. Massaging to the narrative. That's
a great title. But like you were saying with I forget who was it. Was it Carolina where you were like
the Carolina receivers where like everybody's gonna have to play a little. Everyone's coming a little better than they normally would. Yeah.
So you kind of
that or Bryce Young is like gonna have a 15% throwaway rate.
Yeah. So then and then again, you always tie it back to what does the ADP say about what this player is going to do? And if your range is higher than the ADP range, then you draft the player. If your range is lower than the ADP range, then you fade the player. And it's just like I find projections to be both wonderful and just awful because I just think people do it wrong. And I think if you're doing it right, then it's really insightful and it really helps you understand a better perspective of what could happen versus what will happen versus what might happen.
I agree with that, and I will explain how I do it, and then we'll get into a couple of the individual discrepancies. I think we've talked about some examples, but we'll get into some spots where Drew had to look through the sheet and wanted to talk about some specific spots that he either thinks are interesting or really disagrees with. So the way I do it is pretty much what you mentioned. I start everything at a team level. Every team is a little bit different, but in general, I look at the history of that quarterback. I look at the history of the play caller, and I look at the history of the team. And sometimes the projection is pretty easy because we have the same team and the same play caller and the same quarterback, and we have a pretty tight window of what we think they're going to be. And other times it's very different, where we have a different play caller, new quarterback, different team, etc. So I try to blend it together. And I kind of just look at the most recent few years for each of those entities. I average them together, and then I massage a little bit more to whoever I think is ultimately going to be more responsible for driving this, and that's just entirely vibes-based, really. It's like, do I think the quarterback owns this pass rate more or the offensive coordinator? And depending on the circumstances, it might be either one. And then From there, I do that to basically determine their plays per game rate and their pass rate over expectation. And then I look at their Vegas win total and I adjust their pass rate over expectation either up or down based on what I think their game script is going to be to get what I call their adjusted pass rate over expectation, which ultimately is the number that I use to determine their pass rate. And the pass rate gives dropbacks per game. From there, I look at their quarterback and, okay, how many of their dropbacks are becoming pass attempts, with the rest becoming sacks and scrambles. And then I allocate out the sacks and then the quarterback rush attempts, and I further reduce the running back rush attempts. And I add a little bit in for throwaways, and that reduces the target or the pass attempts to targeted throws. So that's how we get the full thing. And then from there, I go to the player level, and it's kind of like what I said before. I kind of allocate out the roles. I allocate out what I think these players would earn in those roles in a vacuum, and then I adjust up or down or spread out based on whether I think those players are frankly capable of those roles. And what I always have at the bottom is an overflow tab. And the overflow is basically the tab of unassigned production. I usually project for most teams their top 3 running backs, their top 4 receivers, their top 2 tight ends, and I add a little bit for certain teams. Like I think the Rams and Chiefs added an extra receiver, some other spots where I added an extra tight end or whatever. But the overflow typically represents the unassigned level. For a team like the Eagles, overflow is like bare minimum. It's basically just me saying there has to be something left over. For a team like the Bucs, like I have a lot of overflow for Bucs running backs compared to other teams because I'm like, I don't really have any reason to give touches from Rachaad White to any of these other running backs in particular, but I don't think that Rachaad White actually deserves as many touches as I'm projecting him for. So I'm just going to leave like 40 carries to no one because I don't really know who to give them to. Like I'm not going to give them to Chase Edmonds. Like, well, he doesn't deserve them, but I'm just going to give them to nobody, basically. But you'll see like there's some teams where there's like the Panthers are a great example where I have like a decent amount of targets to nobody. Because like someone's going to take them, but I just don't think it's going to be these guys. And that's where I try to scale out. This guy's going to walk into targets. This guy's going to walk into carries. Like I try to have some level of give and take between like, are the guys on this depth chart actually capable of earning this? Like the Panthers are a great example of this, right? I think a lot of people are just like, I'm just going to give all these carries to Miles Sanders. And it's like, when you look at Miles Sanders' career, like I'm already giving him a career high in carries by a bit. But it's like, would it make a rational sense to give him 320 carries because they called him a 3-down back? Like, that wouldn't make any rational sense, right? So some of this got to go to Chuba, and then some of this is just kind of to whomever the fuck is kind of what ends up happening. Like Rachaad White, like I'm sorry, you played like shit as a rookie, you were a 3rd-round pick. I'm not projecting for 300 carries. It's possible, but you don't get that.
Totally, and then like with like Rachaad White, I think that kind of spells a bit of opportunity for rostering the backups because nobody thinks they're any good, and they're probably not very good. But who cares because they're running backs. And I don't know if you've been on Twitter lately, but the running backs aren't getting paid because they don't fucking matter. So, like, if Rachaad White isn't good, then and the backups aren't good, then who the hell cares if none of them are good? Somebody is going to get the football because somebody has to get the football. And this isn't wide receiver where the talent matters. They're just guys running the football. Like,
would you be pleased to hear that Sean?
Hey,
would you be pleased to hear that Sean Tucker got cleared for contact today?
I would be pleased to hear that. That would be very pleasing to hear. Yeah, I swear in my Scott Fishbowl draft, I was trying to draft him. I can't see him getting taken anywhere. I must have just missed it. I was just scrolling on my phone, but I couldn't find him in the player database. I was like, he must have got drafted and it just wasn't showing up right or something. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. The point is more so that, like, if there's no clear backup, like these guys are going to be free, like absolutely free.
Totally
and free. Just put them on the roster and see what happens. Peyton Barber once got touches in 2 NFL backfields. And like, that's wild. So it's not unheard of for like somebody you've never heard of to get the football. Isaiah Pacheco is like somebody that nobody had really ever heard of.
You remember Buck Allen?
Buck Allen used to get touches. Well,
I don't know why that's the first name that comes to mind because there's been so many, but Buck Allen is like one of the names that always comes to mind for me of just like a total non-entity who for like 8 weeks was basically an RB1 because it was just like everyone else is not available and we have this Buck guy and we just keep giving him the ball, I guess. Like I don't know. Do you remember that Latavius Murray was like an every week starter on the stretch of last year? Because they just ran out of running backs. Like they just didn't have running backs. They're like, I guess Latavius. I don't know.
There's a guy named Peyton Hillis who had like one magical season out of nowhere.
He was on the cover of Madden.
He was a cover guy on Madden because he was a Brown and they did a fan vote and the Brown fans are crazy. But that's not the point. The point is that Peyton Hillis was absolutely unheard of and just like was the guy in the right spot where nobody else was playing, and he's a running back and talent doesn't matter. Yeah. And that's why we don't care about talent at the running back position.
Well, I certainly care about talent at the running back position, but so that's objectionable. But again, like the whole idea of like this guy's bad, but he's large enough and he catches passes enough is like a way more exciting idea when it's like Trevion Williams is literally free when it's Rachaad White and he's like in the 7th round, right? You always want to be the guy where it's like, hey, anything could happen. You don't want to be like, you look at, the Samaj AP line. Now he actually has an opportunity cost, but back in the day, you look at the P line and it's like, hey, anything could happen. Whereas you look at Rachaad White currently, you're like, anything that could happen murders him. Don't let anything happen. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. Stay. Like if you look, this is a rule of thumb. If you're looking at the projection sheet, and it's available for Discord subscribers too, in the Bulletproof Discord, if you see a team where there's like, I just kind of handed out some carries to the RB2, I handed out some carries to the RB3, and there's a bunch more in the overflow, and you then look at the points per game, and you're like, oh, 13 points per game for the starter. That's pretty darn good. It's like, that's the most they're going to get, right? Because I'm basically projecting everything to go right. And any change,
I'm not comfortable giving them any more than this.
Right. It's like
I will give the bench carries over this motherfucker.
it's like I ever shot weight at 14 points per game. I would bet so hard on the under. But like when you do the projection, it's like I can't really give these carries and targets to any other guy. So I guess I'm kind of giving them to White. But like it's so fragile because any sort of externality negatively affects him. He's a super fragile asset. It's the opposite of the Eagles situation, right? Where it's like I wish I could give these guys more, but I just can't. But it's like any single member of this team gets hurt. Jalen Hurts gets hurt, and the quarterback is scrambling less. Things are better for each of their running backs.
Everyone.
They decide that Kenny Gainwell's just not going to play. Okay, this frees up some touches. We can distribute some of those with Clifton Penny. AJ Brown or Devonta Smith gets hurt. Okay, now we might target running backs because we don't have two alpha target hogs eating up over 50% of the targets plus an alpha tight end. Like literally anything that happens in the Eagles offense makes this projection better, which is why I have Swift projected for like 5 less points per game this year. I would still draft him ahead of Rachaad White in redraft.
Yeah, of course he would. He's way better.
Anyway, I think that was probably enough.
Anything that can happen to DeAndre Swift is a net positive. Anything that can happen to Rachaad White is a net negative.
Now, to be fair, also like what could happen in that backfield is they're like DeAndre Swift, we don't want to play you, and that could be a lot better for Rashad Penny and Kenny Gainwell. But I'm already projecting him to be useless, so that would just make him more useless. But the point being, like anything that you want to attack spots where when unexpected things happen, players have a lot of reason to benefit from it. You don't want to have things where it's like a Jenga board where you're just praying that nothing else happens. Like if you're a Rachaad White manager, you're like, man, I really hope Sean Tucker doesn't look too good at practice today. Like you're constantly looking over your shoulder.
Okay, I want to talk about round 9 dynasty wide receivers.
Well, before we talk about round 9 dynasty wide receivers, which we're going to talk about reason,
just
very shortly,
9, just because it's fun.
Well, we're going to talk about round 9. One of the things about this conversation is we're talking about projections. We're talking about anything that can happen. We're talking about a range of outcomes. What could potentially influence that range of outcomes? I can tell you one thing that's going to influence your range of outcomes. If you go out there and your sack is covered in weeds, your range of outcomes is declining. You are a fragile asset on the dating market. So I want to make sure that your range of outcomes is
really narrowed.
It's narrowed. It's narrowed. You can't even see the ceiling through all the hair down there. So if you want to make sure that you're hitting your ceiling, not just in your fantasy leagues, but in all of your endeavors, you are going to want to check out Manscaped. That's right. Support for Sweatin' Bullets is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Their products are precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped's Performance Package is the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. You can join over 8 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer, which is 20% off, free worldwide shipping. I know that we have some worldwide listeners. I know that we have the people who have chimed into the Discord from Europe, from Asia, from South America. We'll ship it anywhere with the code BPFP for 20% off with Manscaped. Make sure to hit your ceiling out there on the dating field, just so you're feeling better. If you're playing pickleball, you don't have all that hair sweat action happening. You can have a free range of motion. Make sure you head into your fantasy draft. Head into your fantasy draft, nice and aired out, ready to attack it. BPFP 20% off with Manscaped. Let's talk about round 9 wide receivers.
All right. Well done.
Yeah. It's a little clunkier this time because you kept trying to interrupt me to talk about Tyler Lockett.
Okay, so in round 9 we have, and I feel like my tune is changing now because DeAndre Hopkins just signed with the Tennessee Titans. He's going at the 901 for EDP.
You know, he's gone up in best ball ADP since signing with the Titans. That's how much people fear uncertainty. He went to like the absolute worst landing spot, and people are like, "Oh, he's not going to be unemployed this year." Thank
God he's on a
draft him out. It's like, can you imagine? Where would he have gone if he signed with the Chiefs? Like, did people think he wasn't going to play football this year? It's astounding to me. I thought his ADP would for sure go down, but people just aren't rational.
So I had him as severely undervalued when he was a free agent. I'm going to change him now to undervalued rather than severely undervalued because he ended up with the Titans. And like we just talked about, when you do the range of outcomes on the Titans, they're a notoriously low volume team. I don't think they've exceeded 32 pass attempts in my lifetime. I could be wrong, but it's actually probable at this point. And even if we think Hopkins is like a super stud, which I think he still is, or maybe not like prime Hopkins, but he's still probably a top 10 wide receiver in the world. When you factor in that super low pass attempt game, it's really hard to paint an elite ceiling for him. I think he's still got wide receiver 1 well within his range. Not wide receiver 1 overall, like a top 12 wide receiver well within his range of outcomes. I think his floor is still a wide receiver 24, but I just don't see any path to the wide receiver 1 with the Titans. So I'm bumping him down a bit. And then the other guy going in round 9 is Keenan Allen. And I think I might actually bump him up to severely undervalued, where I only have him as undervalued right now. And the reason for that is he's also still him. What's that?
Outscore Hopkins.
What?
If he should project to outscore Hopkins this year.
Oh yeah, I think he should project to outscore Hopkins this year. And like I think there's a chance that he is exceptional. Maybe not like wide receiver 1 overall, because that's pretty hard to do for a guy like him. But I think he's like top 5 is perfectly plausible. So
one interesting thing with both of these guys is that it really does bring up the validity of the cliff theory. This is going to be an off-season research project for me, basically inspired by these two players. And it'll be a research project regardless of how their seasons turn out. But for those that aren't familiar, the cliff theory is Adam Harstad's theory in what is still, in my opinion, the best fantasy football article ever written, which was, you're probably thinking about aging wrong, and everyone who's ever heard me on a podcast has already heard me give the long version, so I'll just give the short version. But basically the TLDR is players don't actually gradually age. Players are what they are, and they are what they are until they're nothing at all, essentially. This is really elite players we're talking about. And the only reason why it looks like an aging slope is because each of these players hit the cliff at staggered different times in their career. So when you aggregate them, it looks like a cliff where group of 28 wide receivers is better than 29, better than 30, better than 31, but actual individual receivers are just flat and then drop off. Hopkins and Allen are interesting in that both are well past the age apex and well into the cliff potential zone. But Well, Hopkins is a little bit interesting because Hopkins was humming along basically at more or less the same rate every year. Had a pretty substantial drop-off in 2021, but then really rebounded in 2022, where all of a sudden his target share, targets per route run, his fantasy peripherals are all basically on par with what he had been through to 2020. Keenan Allen has basically been the same guy his entire career, except for I think he had like one injury-riddled year really early. But when he's been healthy, he's basically been the same guy every single year for fantasy, plus or minus the variance. Interesting thing with both of them is that there are some signs of potential qualitative decline that aren't showing up in the quantitative data. Keenan Allen saw his reception perception fall off drastically this year, especially on down the field routes. He was really focused on intermediate route share. Although interestingly with Keenan Allen, actually upped his efficiency. This was a kind of a concern the last couple of years that people had brought up with Keenan Allen, saying, well, he's still throwing with volume bet, but his yards per target, his yards per route run have really fallen down each of the last couple of years. He might not have the juice anymore. His yards per route run comes way up, really rebounds in 2022. Look across the aisle at Hopkins, basically all of his qualitative metrics are down. Not down as in bad, but and certainly not down bad. But they are down. His reception perception paints him as a very good receiver, no longer as an elite receiver. PFF grade had lowered versus comparative years, and it was 2 years running that it was a lot lower than his 2020 and prior. Yards per target was down. Yards per route run was higher than in 2021, but it was the second lowest since the Osweiler year. And you can definitely make a case, I think, compounded by the fact that both he was willing to be paid in free agency, it was 2 years, $26 million, and no team was willing to trade for him on his current contract with Arizona, that he's not really viewed as that elite game-breaking talent anymore, and that he's viewed as more as a really good starting wide receiver. And this plays into something that I've talked about it for a while at running back. I didn't really think it was a thing at wide receiver, but I'm curious. And it's my canary theory of aging, which is the idea that players get, unless their career is ended by injury, what I call a canary season. Are you familiar with the canary in the coal mine?
I'm familiar with the canary in the coal mine, yes.
Right. So the idea for people who are unaware is that go into a coal mine, you bring a canary down with you. The canary, if it gets toxic, is going to die before you do. So then you know that there's toxins in the area and you're able to evacuate the coal mine. And my theory that I told at running back for a while, I haven't really ever tested a receiver, but it's the idea that you get a year of qualitative decline that precedes your quantitative decline, in the sense that your coaches don't really know that you've declined yet. The defenses don't really know that you've declined yet. And so you're still putting up vaguely similar stat lines despite not being quite as good. And that sometimes we can get evidence from this canary year to then sell out before the cliff year happens the next year. I think I've always thought it was more intuitive at running back. And we've seen, I think, more examples of this occur at running back. I don't know if it's as intuitive at wide receiver, but I am curious if it worries you at all that Hopkins and Keenan might be showing some signs of decline. In Hopkins' case, pretty universally. In Keenan's case, in some ways he really is, some ways he's really not. Or if you think it's priced in, or if you think that this isn't a thing at all.
Yeah, I think I would be very, very concerned if they were not available in the 9th round of startup drafts. I think it's totally plausible that Hopkins has lost a step and Keenan has lost a step. I think that, I don't know. I don't do injury analysis or research, but intuitively it would make sense to me that players become more fragile as they get older. We basically seen Hopkins be healthy for 9 consecutive years and then get hurt 2 years in a row. He wasn't hurt a lot last year as far as I know, but he did get hurt in the final game of his final game of the season, missed the last game of the season, played injured in the last.
And he missed the first 6 games with the suspension.
Yeah, but that was a suspension. He wasn't hurt.
Right, but I'm just saying it's not like he made it through those 6 games healthy. He just didn't play in them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
And then, so I think it's totally plausible that both guys just fall completely off the cliff this year. But in round 9, I don't care. We're talking about.
No, I'm with you.
So Hopkins is at 901. Keenan Allen is at 903. Guess the guy at 902.
Guess the guy where? 902?
902. The guy between them.
I think it's Brock Purdy.
It's not. It's Devin A. Chain.
Okay.
We're talking about DeAndre Hopkins' potential wide receiver 1 season, or Devin A. Chain are your selection choices.
I quite like I must be looking at an outdated sheet of data because it is Purdy. For me. But anyway, same difference. I mean, look, I'm going to change Stan, so I take some level of issue with this, but I agree. I'd rather have Hopkins than Keenan Allen.
And not close. Like, it's like light years apart.
Yeah, Keenan is especially interesting. So I disagree with you a little. Well, I don't disagree with you in the macro sense on Hopkins, and that I am absolutely buying DeAndre Hopkins in the 9th round. I have cooled on Hopkins, though, since the Titans, because I do feel like Hopkins, like I see a pretty wide range of outcomes on his current talent level. Like, on one hand, he's coming off another near 30% or 30% target share season, basically in line with every year of his career, except for like his rookie year in 2021. I think it's totally possible that he can go to a place and just alpha out a 29-30% target share again. I think that there are also reasons for concern, like I just mentioned. I think the biggest reason for concern is honestly that NFL teams like clearly don't value him as a superstar wide receiver anymore. Like, if they thought that he was Cooper Kupp, then a team would have paid the Arizona Cardinals a 5th round pick for the privilege of taking on that contract. Like, he never would have been cut. So clearly NFL teams don't think he's absolutely elite anymore. But I do think he has that upside. My concern is, what is his upside now on the Titans? So I have him projected at 13.7 points per game, which seems kind of heinous when we're talking about DeAndre Hopkins. But the biggest reason for that is that the Titans don't project to pass a whole lot, and I still do have 3 Will Levis games. If you say, okay, Brian Daniel's playing all 17 games, that's my first assumption to make. That sounds pretty plausible. I bet that would probably get him up to 14.5 or 14.7, something like that. You still then probably need him to run hot. I don't know that he's shown that many signs recently of being like a super efficient player. I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to be going for a lot of 80-yard touchdowns.
I don't think he's ever been a super efficient player, which is kind of funny about.
No, he hasn't. But that's what I'm saying. Like, so his path to hitting
that's not an option.
Right. Like, his path to ceilings is like he can run a little hot on touchdowns, and then he just has to get through the rest on volume. Like, he's never going to have like the Jalen Waddle season we just had, where it's like he starts breaking screens 80 yards to the house. Like, that's not happening.
Ew.
So it becomes pretty narrow, and it becomes especially narrow on the Titans. Okay, sure. You want to say, all right, I'm not going to bake in any of these regression concerns. I'm not going to give him a 26% target share. I'm going to give him a 29% target share. All right. I mean, I think that's like a very plausible target share. I don't think that's his single most likely outcome, but it wouldn't surprise me in any way if that's what he had this year. I haven't done the math on it, but like, I still think you're probably getting to only 15.5, 16 points per game, which is good. It's like a low-end wide receiver 1 probably. But I guess my issue is dynasty in the 9th round, very interested. Best ball in the 4th round, I'm like, I got to pay 4th round, and I got to hope that a really old guy stays healthy and is actually still elite so that I can get like 15.5 points per game. And I got to hope that they keep playing their quarterback all year instead of going over to like the worst rookie I've ever seen. Like, that just seems like I'm taking on like a lot of situational and player fragility for like not a massive win. So to me, I would just rather take guys that I think I have less fragility, even if I think that their actual individual player ceiling is lower in that spot. But I do think in Dynasty it's more worth it. Keenan Allen, I mean, I'm willing to bet on that because I don't even know how good he has to be. The LA Chargers have been a super high pass rate team in Herbert's career, and they've played at a really high pace. And then Kellen Moore has never ran less than 65 plays per game as offensive coordinator, which is a really high number. Like, it's pretty easy to project that team for 67, 68 plays per game. And when you combine most plays per game in the league with probably a top 3 pass rate over expectation, like, what do I have them projected as for dropbacks? It's probably an absurd number. I have them projected to drop back to pass 44.8 times per game. And that results in 40.4 pass attempts per game. And the pie is so big on the Chargers that another guy I think is a great dynasty buy. I have Mike Williams for an entirely pedestrian 19.2% target share.
This is a ridiculously bad dynasty buy. To the listeners,
it's a
do not
great
do this.
Dynasty buy.
Under no circumstances.
He is the cheapest 15 points. Mike Williams, for the haters and the losers, of which there are so many, if you exclude games that he left before playing even 50% of snaps, he's been 15 points per game for 2 years straight. and he's in this great situation. He's younger than Keenan Allen. I would absolutely buy Mike Williams, and I would buy Keenan Allen. Point being, 19.2% of the targets. That's like super mediocre. Like that's like a Zay Jones level target share from last year. I still have him at 14.2 points per game. It's life is good for the LA Chargers. I have Keenan Allen projected, I think, in my top 10 wide receivers. I wouldn't draft him in my top 10 wide receivers, to be clear.
You don't have to.
But he's an interesting spot where A, you don't have to. B, you're getting a ton of projectable volume. And it's fragile because he's old. But there is some contingent upside there. Like the market's baking in Quentin Johnston being a much better third receiver option than Josh Palmer. That's probably the case. But Quentin Johnston's a rookie with some flags in his profile. No, but let's just be real about it. Like, okay, you like Quentin Johnston more than I like Quentin Johnston. But
yeah, point
being, like he's a rookie. It's not inconceivable that he just sucks. Like we're projecting a lot on him. His floor is not high.
Jefferson.
Exactly. But that's contingent upside. Like, what if Quentin Johnston's actually what if he's slow Rashad Perriman? If you consider that he's slow Rashad Perriman, I don't know if anyone's made that comp before.
Are you concerned that Quentin Johnston is simply Jamar Chase? And you're going to pass on Jamar Chase catching passes from Justin Herbert and the highest passing volume offense in the world.
Right. So we talked about it. Mike Williams, he gets injured all the time. Mike Williams, what does he do? He throws himself into the air and lands on the shoulder all the time. So, like, Keenan Allen, if you start getting injuries to Williams, or if Johnston gets hurt, or he's just disappointing, like, there's a potential where Keenan Allen could get 26, 27% of the targets. And
I mean, 26.
Yeah, it's possible. What was his target share at?
I thought it was like 27
last year. Yeah, I want to say I was going to say 26, but I don't want to just like speak out of my ass. I want to actually have it in front of me. Last year was 22.5, but he also left some games early. His target rate was 27. You're never going to have a target rate as high as your target because you're never going to run literally 100% of the routes. But it could be, like if you look at his previous year, he was 26.7% target rate, 25% target share. Year before that, he was 27% target share, 26 the year before that. Like if he's in that 25 to 27 range, or even if guys got hurt and he gets in the 28 range, I mean, there's so many targets available. Like I have 665 targeted throws. So you can do the math on that yourself. You get a 25% target share on that. That's pushing 170 targets.
I think you're making an excellent case to be buying Quentin Johnston in all leagues, all formats. Just lean in to the rookie variance on a high caliber rookie and just let it ride. We're talking about the highest passing volume offense in the history of the world happening in 2023. It's going to be great.
Out of curiosity, would you care to guess who I have projected as the third highest pass volume team in the league?
Oh, let me think. I'm going to go with. I feel like it's going to be a surprise now that you've said that.
I'll say that's. It's not that surprising. It's not like a crazy hot take, but I don't think it's quite as intuitive as you think. First is LA. The second is very obvious. It's the Kansas City Chiefs. But the third is slightly less obvious, and it relates to what we were talking about with Quentin Johnston. It's actually tied for third. I have two at the exact same amount of pass sets per game. One of them is really obvious.
I don't know. Who is it?
Well, one of them is the Bengals.
Buffalo.
It's pretty obvious. No, they don't actually pass quite as much as you think because Allen converts a decent chunk of dropbacks to pass
Cincinnati.
attempts. I think I have them in the top 10. Yeah, Cincinnati is one of them. Cincinnati is the obvious one. But the other one is the actual wide receiver 2 in the class, the Minnesota Vikings. Did you know that Adam Thielen ran the second most routes in the entire NFL last year? Bet you didn't. Now you do.
The Viking, how high were they last year? How many pass attempts did they have last year?
Super high. Like they were. I
knew they were high, but I didn't think they were like third in the league high.
I think they might have been.
I thought they were like maybe like
they were. Yeah, they were third in the league last year.
Holy!
Tampa was one. Tampa was number one, and that's not happening again. Chargers were 2. Minnesota was 3. And part of the Minnesota thing was like a little bit goofy. like they weren't actually that high pass rate over expectation. A decent portion of it was like they were kind of in these crazy shootouts, but they're always going to be higher pass rate than pass rate over expectation because Cousins doesn't scramble, right? So you're gonna so every time, like a lot of this that people forget is the conversion of dropbacks to passes, right? Josh Allen has a lower conversion of dropbacks to passes. So even though the Bills always have really high PROE, the actual passes aren't that as high because he's scrambling.
Gotcha.
That's not a Cousins issue. You also have their defense is bad. So I project that they're probably going to be like an 8-9 win team. Their Vegas over-under is 8.5. So you're not going to get a reduction to their pass rate over expectation. And I think might not want to run the ball with Mr. Alexander Madison because I think he's ass. I don't know how I didn't bring him up. And no, I do not like Alexander.
I thought you're always out in the streets being like, oh yeah, Dalvin Cook's out. Alexander Madison's the guy. Oh yeah.
Well, yes, I like that when he got to fill in as a 0 RB guy. But you have no idea how many fights I've had in my life of people being like, "Why do you like Tony Pollard so much? He's just Alexander Madison." And I'm like, "Have you looked at the numbers?" I have like a borderline irrational hatred of Alexander Madison. I don't know why I kept bagging on Rachaad White over and over again. I should have picked on Alexander Madison a little bit. Point being, I think that they actually have they passed a ton last year. They're probably going to win less games. And then they went and spent a first-round pick on a receiver instead of dustball Adam Thielen. So their pass rate looks really favorable. And Jordan Addison's better than Quentin Johnston. And he's faster because he runs 140 miles per hour. And he's a dog lover. So I don't know how you can debate that.
I think that what you simply need to know is that
people say that Quentin Johnston has that dog in him, but can you have more dog in you than racing 140 miles per hour in a Lamborghini to save your dog? That is having dog in you.
I don't know that he had dog in him, but he certainly had dog in his car, I presume. Was the dog with him? Or was he going to get it and then save it?
It's unclear. I mean, first of all, it's pretty clear that he didn't have a dog emergency and he was street racing. But in the unlikely event that the story was true, it's currently unclear whether he had the dog in the car.
It's certainly possible that there was a dog emergency. I've had dog emergencies.
Did you drive 140 miles per hour?
I did not, but only because I didn't have a Lamborghini. That was the only thing holding me back.
Also, this is my favorite thing about the dog bit. Is people immediately were like, well, I get it now. It's probably worse if he was driving 140 miles per hour with a dog in the car. That's actually not a great dog owner move. That's a how you kill your dog move.
Okay, but let's be honest. Are you actually aside from the excellent Jordan Addison off-field shenanigans, very dangerous, by the way, not drive.
I'm very consistent about this. I quite clearly prefer Jordan Addison to Quentin Johnston. Yeah.
So you're looking, just to be clear, because I want the audience to understand.
Redraft, dynasty, best ball, you name a format. Addison greater than sign Johnston. I'm just questioning to make sure, checking for understanding, simply because when I look at their draft picks, I saw that Jordan Addison was at the 1.23 and Quentin Johnston was at the 1.21. And ergo, that's true. Oh, there's Flowers. Go ahead, Addison too.
Yeah, Addison's terrible. So what we're trying to determine is how can you possibly have Addison low or higher when he is in fact drafted not one but 2 picks later?
It's a bold take. It's a bold stance. Sure.
And furthermore, we have Jordan Addison with Justin Jefferson for probably the rest of his life. We have Jordan Addison with a Kirk Cousins on an expiring contract. Or we have Quentin Johnston, who is drafted 2 picks sooner, is better in every single way, and also
not really
has 30-year-old Keenan Allen and can't land on his feet Mike Williams and Mike Williams is old too. Isn't he 28 now, 29? How old is Mike Williams? 28?
28.
So we have 2 old, fragile wide receivers and the best young, high-volume quarterback in the world, not named Patrick Mahomes, and you're taking Jordan Addison. I thought you were a ceiling chaser. I thought you walked into a house and were like, where are the vaulted ceilings? I am not taking Jordan Addison. I will take Quentin Johnston. I like vaulted ceilings.
Has anyone ever gone from older than you think to younger than you think faster than Mike Williams? Mike Williams has always been older than you think rookie because it was he's been in college forever. But now I think people think he's 32.
I think he's 28 and fragile.
That's correct. Yeah.
And he's like Gabriel Davis, but like good at it.
Oh, okay. No. Find a stat that shows that these two are similar. They're not similar.
Do they not both catch a whole bunch of downfield passes?
Yeah, actually, no. Mike Williams used that is like maybe Gabriel Davis will do the Mike Williams heel turn in year 5 or whatever it was. But Mike Williams very much changed. Like if you look at his 2020 and prior, he was living in the 15 to 18 ADOT range. Last 2 years, 10.7 ADOT, 12 ADOT. Okay. That's a reasonable range. And with that, naturally, his target rate has come up. Not up to like wow levels.
And with that, naturally, he's at a Gabriel Davis target share at a reasonable ADOT. This is worse for
games early. If you
Mike Williams.
Okay, if I put up Mike Williams,
his target rate, he's leaving games where his target rate's 20%.
That's fine. He's fine. It's 20.9%. He's fine. It's fine. He's a fine receiver.
No, he's a guy in an offense.
If you think that Mike Williams is a guy in an offense, then you have to say that T. Higgins is a guy in an offense because their stats are almost identical. Their yards per run are next to each other. The target rate is like a 1 percentage point difference. The target share is almost the exact same. Yeah, but T. Higgins' their yard share is the exact same.
That's the difference.
Oh, because he's good because you say he's good because their stats are the same.
No, it's just like whenever people tell me that a player has a good ceiling, and then I say why, and they say because I said so. That's what I just did.
So the thing about T. Higgins and Mike Williams is they score the same amount of points, and they have the same peripherals, and they play in a similar role, and they play in a similar offense. But one's good and one's bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm glad you're catching up.
Okay, let me sort that out. Speaking of players of a questionable skill, Quentin Johnston. I think we kind of went through a lot of this over the rookies episode, so I don't need to go into the dig deep thing. I will just sum up that my stance from the prospect profiles is that Quentin Johnston is a high variance prospect with some really intriguing aspects and some really questionable aspects. And Jordan Addison is a very clean prospect with, I wouldn't say the highest ceiling profile in the world, but he has basically no question marks other than his apparently criminal behavior. But at least based on his on-field production, very clean profile. So I like Jordan Addison more pre-draft, and then that wasn't that crazy of a take. And then post-draft, there was this weird phenomenon where ADP had Addison higher, and both in redraft and in dynasty, and most people like Addison more. But in the Bulletproof Discord, people are like, are you out of your mind? You have Addison higher? Quentin Johnston? Sloboshan Perryman? And yeah, I do. The basic take on it is that I want my wide receivers to do the job that a wide receiver is supposed to do, which is to accrue value and then let me trade you for something else. And so to me, the idea of chasing the ceiling is probably not rostering Quentin Johnston or Jordan Addison. It might be, but I don't think that's the most likely scenario for either of them. The ceiling is probably letting them have a really nice rookie year and then shipping them off in a deal for an elite receiver or a tight end or a running back or ideally a quarterback. And I have more confidence in Jordan Addison to do that because I have more confidence in the floor of the profile. So I'm buying the floor to trade for the ceiling. I also think Jordan Addison's going to score more points this year. One thing, it's not like a long-term concern for Quentin Johnston if he's good, but Jordan Addison's going to run all the routes. Like he's competing for routes with KJ Osborne, that's not really competing with anybody. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen aren't coming off the field if they're both healthy. So
in Dynasty, we don't care if
rolls in. We care a little bit. We care a little bit if a better prospect scores more points than the other guy this year. That matters. I mean, the main point of it is I think that, if both of these guys
wait. Let's back up a second. How is Jordan Addison a better prospect again?
He has way less red flags in his profile. His production profile is stronger, has a higher peak production.
Why is it stronger?
In year 2. Because it's more of it.
Quentin Johnston
outproduced more.
Jordan Addison 2 out of 3 years.
Yes, and his peak production was way lower, and his production in year 2 is way lower. The peak production level of Jordan Addison is significantly higher than Quentin Johnston, who stayed at the absolute bare minimum threshold every year. Did it on slants, did it on 9 routes, did it on screens. Was a limited player.
Did a great job.
He did an okay job.
Did a great job.
He relied a ton on contested targets and had a really low contested catch rate. So he constantly was not open, and then he wasn't very good at catching contested passes. But he was really good at taking drag routes to the house. I mean that pejoratively because I want to speak pejoratively about him, but that is his upside. Like his yak ability is ungodly, but his profile is not consistent. Like he has a lot of weaknesses. His ability to consistently separate is very sketchy. His ability to win catches in contested situations is very sketchy. His peak production is severely lacking.
That's 28%.
That's severely lacking. If you there are plenty of analysts who base their models off a 30% breakout threshold, in which he would literally never break out. The difference between how you set your thresholds on Quentin Johnston could be so drastic that you're either saying he broke out every year or he never broke out at all, because he just lives at the minimum threshold because he's a limited player who only does a few things well currently. He might learn to do all the things well eventually. But this is like George Pickens, not stylistically, but this is like George Pickens 2.0, where you get this player who has a high variance range of outcomes, and it's interesting, and he might hit. George Pickens still might hit. But it would be much more surprising if Jordan Addison failed than if Quentin Johnston failed. And when I'm talking about rookie wide receivers, I want to avoid failure.
That is such a coward's way to play. I want to get the good player in the good offense that doesn't have Justin Jefferson.
A good player in a good offense. That's fine, Jeff. If Jordan Addison hits the ceiling, he can still have a 27% target share next to Justin Jefferson. We just saw Devonta Smith do this.
He didn't have a 27% target share next to A.J. Brown. He had 24%.
He sure did. He sure did have a 27% target share.
What? Actually? I thought they were 29 and 24.
27.0%.
Fascinating. Well, then I guess the only thing left to do is
You know, be better than a 27% target share on the Eagles, by the way? 27% target share not on the Eagles.
Yeah, like the one that Quentin Johnston's going to have
on the Vikings
for the damn Chargers.
I fully agree that at a certain level of ability, the landing spot makes a really big difference. I'll use like DK Metcalf and T. Higgins as an example of guys where I think like they are clearly good enough to hit anywhere, but the extent of the hit is situationally reliant. Like if Jordan Addison is, let's say he's Devonta Smith. I think Devonta Smith's a little better than these guys, but whatever.
Is the target share on Player Profiler for Devonta Smith correct?
Well,
how's the target share higher than the target rate?
Oh, because he runs every route.
He ran 91% of the routes, and he got a higher target share than target rate.
There's like he has 97% route participation.
Oh, I'm looking at snaps. Sorry.
There's like an element of where like it's like targeted. Not every route becomes a targeted throw. So I'm not gonna. I don't know if the stats that are on Player Profile are wrong, then by all means, I'm just reading the stats as they are. So I can't be a candidate for.
So you got it wrong. Noted.
Well, I don't think that they are wrong. I think that he had a 22% target share.
You're probably right. There's a chance,
but if they're wrong, the stats wrong, it's mea culpa. I'm just saying. I wasn't just saying it off the top of my head. It's there on a site, and everything that you see on the internet is true. I don't know if you've heard that, but there's nothing ever wrong on the internet. Anyway, what was I saying? There is a certain talent threshold where I think that the landing spot can matter a lot. Probably isn't year one, probably a year 2, year 3, year 4 situation. But let's say Quentin Johnston is a DK Metcalf level talent and Jordan Addison's a Tyler Lockett level talent. Johnston being on the Chargers long-term with Herbert and not with Justin Jefferson definitely matters in that scenario, where he could be the 14th best receiver in the league and finish as the wide receiver 5. And Addison would probably finish as the wide receiver 14. I totally concede that. But if these guys suck, it doesn't matter what the landing spot is. Hello, every Chiefs wide receiver. If these guys are just like good, like as in like good starting NFL players, but it doesn't matter that much, then it's a pretty minimal gap. Like if Quentin Johnston's like Mike Williams talent level, it's like, okay, it's better that you're on the Chargers, but you're not like a difference-making dynasty asset anyway. And if these guys are actually like elite, like Justin Jefferson elite, then it really doesn't matter where you are anyway, or it doesn't matter that much. So it's a pretty narrow window to me where I'm like, this landing spot's going to make a difference. If it was a true tie, like I put in my thing, pre-draft, I had Zay Flowers 3, Quentin Johnston 4, and I said I will flip them if Johnston has a better landing spot. And he got a better landing spot, and I flipped them. But I don't. To me, Addison, Johnston, it's not a massive gap, and it shrunk after the draft. But it's a legitimate enough gap that I don't think that the landing spot should close. I think that Addison has less red flags in his profile. His production is higher at its peak overall, and it's done in a more consistent way. It's not based off of as many gimmicky routes He doesn't have issues getting open. He doesn't have issues with contested catches. He's able to get open and play like a normal receiver, not like a little gimmicky piece.
Well, all right then.
It wouldn't shock me if Johnson hits. I'm not Matt Kelly. I'm not going out like guaranteeing a bust.
Well, absolutely, it wouldn't shock you if he hits because he's awesome. So
Well,
that would make
that's a little
sense.
much. Have you considered that he's just Josh Doxson?
That is not something I had considered. That is something I will consider from now on. Do you want to know
a lot of them in best ball?
I want to tell you every single Bulletproof wide receiver that did not have a 30% breakout age. You
Okay.
ready?
Let's hear it.
Jeremy Maclin, stud, top 12 season, bunch of top 24s. Randall Cobb, my dude.
Man, that's a one-hit wonder. Like
180.
Murray Head.
2 top 24s, 1 top 12. T. Higgins, Hollywood Brown, and Aurelius Ben.
Okay, so
like
that
they're all
sounds
good
like
except for Aurelius Ben.
sounds like I don't know superstars on that list.
It's a 5-player list. How many
No,
superstars
six.
are there in the whole world?
Well, I would hope more than 0. How many total Bulletproof wide receivers are there?
I don't know, 30 or 40 maybe. Let me check. Let me get back to you. One moment, please.
I'm slight concerned when we're talking about this small of a subset of the Bulletproof wide receivers. And I feel like that subset is like over 6'3" and under. It's like
40.
It's a lot.
40-ish.
Okay. So it's 15%, right? That's we're talking about 85% of the Bulletproof class hit a 30% breakout age, but your boy QJ is in the not so productive group with Aurelius Ben. I don't think he's a 1-for-1 comp to Aurelius Ben to me.
Aurelius Ben. Come on.
Any other points of emphasis? We talked about Hopkins. We talked about Keenan. We talked about the Chargers. We talked about the Vikings.
I got nothing. Oh, we should quickly talk about. No, I do have something. Sky Moore.
Oh yeah, let's talk about Sky Moore. So
and the whole Chiefs extravaganza.
Yeah, so we talked about the Chiefs a lot on our last show.
We did.
Kadarius Toney literally couldn't make it through one
changed since then,
practice because he's so committed to the bit. Has anyone ever been more committed to the bit than Kadarius Toney? I mean, one practice, shaking the punt. Come on, dude! Like, just
it's not even like wide receiver drills. Like, brutal.
It's just so frustrating. Anyway, I hate this guy. So Sky Moore, yeah, I mean, pretty. His chances of being out there for 70-80% of the routes in week 1 looking pretty good. Like at this point, the players who took the majority of the first team reps today were apparently Sky Moore, MVS, and Justin Watson. So I guess the fear would be like the only way that Sky gets totally out of the mix by week 1, assuming Toney is not cleared to play, is Richie James beats him out for the slot role and Rashee Rice earns the slot, and I guess he would take the Justin Watson spot, and then Sky gets left out in the cold. But if you're Sky, like the probably the 2 players that you fear most from a talent upside perspective are Toney and Rice. He's clearly ahead of Rice currently, and Toney's not going to play. So it's like unless they're going to play, I can't see them coming out there and just being like, yeah, we're playing MVS, Justin Watson, and Richie James, and just admitting defeat on all of our young players. That seems unlikely. So there's now a path where previously there wasn't really a path for Sky and Rice to both play on every route, but there is now. Like if Rice is good in camp, that doesn't actually doom Sky anymore. They could both be out there with MVS. So pretty exciting. I think it's likely he's going to play 70% of the routes week 1, and we'll see what he can do, man. I mean, I don't know. He could Brian Edwards it up. Brian Edwards was an every down player, started his second season. So was Jalen Reagor. Didn't do much with it, but
he was there too.
Yeah, I mean that's what happens. A lot of these face planters is they have a really good camp, they get the starting role, and then they remind everyone why they face planted, and then they don't get the starting role for very long after that. But if you're a Sky believer, the interesting thing is I think we're going to get a pretty fat and tempting sell window, and I'm curious how you're planning to play it.
Well, I really think it's going to depend on how fat that sell window gets, because I think like I've been racking my brain and I cannot think of a single face planner that I have ever said going by. I'm pretty sure Sky's the first, which is saying a lot.
Okay. Sky Moore or a 2024 second that you think will be early?
I think you got to go with the second there. You just have to.
So you're going to get that. I assure you that if you would like to liquidate all of your Sky Moores for early 2024 seconds by the end of the preseason, I think it's very likely you'll be able to do that.
Yeah. So
people are, because I think the dynasty market is a slight lagging indicator. Like the best ball market is frothy for Sky Moore. He opened in the late 120s in ADP. Prior to the Tony news, he had already climbed up to pick 99. So he had risen 3 full rounds in ADP since launch. This Tony news is going to make him rocket ship. Like I think he's going to be an early 7th round pick in short order, and you're going to get your chance to sell.
Out. Let's go. Thank you, Patrick Mahomes.
Oh, see, this is the thing. Like I know that's the right move. I kind of want to have fun with it, man. I just kind of want to see it. I don't know. Like if Sky hits and I have none after the punishment I took all year, and then all I do is I get out for an early second, and then he smashes, I'm just going to be so miserable. Like I think I would be happier having him die on my teams, like from a human emotion standpoint, and getting nothing than sitting out and watching it. I would just be so sad.
See, I would just I'm just very robotic with things like this. I don't care at all. I'm like, hey, look at this. This guy's now worth more than I think he is. Perfect. We'll cash out and we might lose, but typically we win. So we're just gonna fall back on trust the process and move on.
But have you considered that he is fulfilling the prophecy of being a 1-for-1 comp with Davante Adams?
I have considered that. I've also considered that I could probably just, add a second to Sky Moore if that's the case and get Quentin Johnston, who was a first-round pick, 2 picks ahead of Jordan Addison. That's 2 picks better than Jordan Addison. And that would be pretty fun to me. So
yeah,
I'll do that.
Yeah, I would do that for sure. I'm really regretting not hammering Sky in all my off-season startups. Like I still have a decent amount from last season, and I didn't sell that much of it. But I wish that I'd hammered him in all my off-season startups. I didn't. I was weaning myself off at the Sky Moore methadone clinic. I have been drafting him a ton in best ball. At one point, he was like my most drafted player, and then his ADP has really shot up. So I just the gas pedal, but
like given the fact everyone is terrible, and he's probably, or at least was, a good prospect, and then also is like getting a lot of hype and playing with the starters, etc. I'm just like, I'm glad we've been buying. And then, like you said, if his price is going to get up to early second, I'm going to cash out. And if I can't find anyone once it gets to late first, I'm cashing out again. And I would give.
I don't think he'll get to first unless he actually performs. I think people will be willing to trade early seconds on preseason hype. I don't think people will be able to justify first. It's like, okay, you might get some crackpots in some home leagues. They'll be like, oh, we're going to shit, 2026 is forever. And they'll get your 2026 first from some goof. But I think serious people not be trading your first. But I think serious people be like, yeah, sure, I'll do a second. Just what's the worst? I'd burn a second. I can see that happen.
If I don't sell him for my seconds and then he's playing well, maybe not 16, 17 points per game, but playing well, I feel like I'd still sell him for a first. Once we
yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean I think it's really unlikely that he would get to the point where I wouldn't sell him for a first. I mean, how many wide receivers total would you not sell for a base first right now? Probably not more than 15 or 20.
Not very many, no. Yeah,
right. To me, the line is like a Christian Watson. It's where it's I'd be really torn.
I feel like I'd probably take a first for Christian Watson.
Right, and Christian Watson's probably in the late teens in Dynasty wide receiver rankings.
Yeah.
He's the first guy where I'm like really on the fence about it. Him and Addison and Johnston are all guys that I'm like having and hawing about. But like,
see, I'd keep Johnston for sure. I'd easily sell Addison for a first.
Yeah, I don't view. I mean, I like Addison the most of those three, probably, followed by Watson, followed by Johnston.
It's interesting that you place so much emphasis on Addison's good season, but not his bad one.
His third season was the exact same on a per route basis. He just ran less routes.
That's not alarming.
No, USC beat everybody by 46 points, and he was chilling on the bench.
Oh, that makes sense then.
Yeah, that would be like the group. But like DK Metcalf, I prefer DK Metcalf to a first.
Why? I'm curious now. Why would you prefer DK Metcalf to a first? They just drafted JSN. Geno Smith sucks. Why? What is the reason? He's never scored 17 points per game.
What the fuck are you talking about? Geno Smith sucks. What on earth is this?
We have one season of like relevance.
Of being awesome. Of being sustainably awesome. Doing it in a sustainable fashion.
One season of relevance from many quarterbacks in the history of the football game. And
who performed the way that Geno Smith performed, not just in fantasy, but as a real life quarterback who then faded away into oblivion.
Was Geno Smith good?
Incredible.
How good?
Like a top 10
better
quarterback
than Teddy Bridgewater when Teddy Bridgewater was lighting up all the advanced stats?
By an absolute mile. Yeah.
Really? Teddy Bridgewater was like number one in
some goofy stuff. Like he was like a CPOE merchant. Geno was great in CPOE, but you look at unanimously PFF grades.
What about Jimmy Graham or Jimmy Garoppolo? Is he better than Jimmy Garoppolo?
But Jimmy's a hack. Like, and Geno didn't even run that kind of offense. Like Geno was lighting up that stuff. But there's a big difference. Like you also talk to the film bro community. Like the film bro community has never been. Well, I think it's interesting with quarterbacks because you get a lot of these play action quarterbacks who I think are merchanting the stats. Like you go and see, like you check in on like a Steven Ruiz or a Theo Ash or a Justin.
I don't know who these people are. Are these quarterbacks?
No, these aren't quarterbacks. These are film people. Okay. If you wade into big film, right?
Okay. I think I'm looking at the wrong thing because I'm seeing Geno Smith with a 75.4 PFF grade.
That's solid.
Yeah, he's right beside Jacoby Brissett and Brock Purdy. Yeah, he's really, really good. Top tier.
Jacoby Brissett played pretty well last year. But okay, what's it like? If you look at the aggregate of stats, right? You look at
what is the aggregate of stats?
CPOE. You pull out all of the stats and then you aggregate them, and then you look at where this guy finished, and he was generally in that 8 to 15 range across the board.
So like just completely mediocre.
A top half quarterback in the league.
Okay,
there's 32 of them.
Where was Jacoby Brissett in all these metrics?
Pretty well. He performed pretty well.
So we should draft Jacoby Brissett then.
I'm pretty open to taking flyers on Jacoby Brissett, but I'm definitely open to drafting Geno Smith, who was awesome last year and has the best weapons in the league.
People should be.
Would you like to make a bet? Okay, would you like to make a bet right now on air? Geno Smith versus Russell Wilson points per game in 2023.
Yeah, I would love to.
All right, sick. $50 for Buck. Team Geno.
$50 for what?
Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, points per game.
I don't know why you always make me gamble. I don't even gamble. Is it just like who gets more points? Or is there like some...
I just said points per game. No, it's who scores more points per game.
Okay. And
you're going to like to put a game minimum.
And you're going to take Geno Smith.
I'm taking Geno Smith.
Like you pick any quarterback in the world and you're picking Geno Smith.
Well, no. Would you like to bet Patrick Mahomes versus Russell
Wilson? I don't know.
Patrick
Mahomes. Pardon me. Okay.
I would like to make a Geno Smith focused bet, and I thought that Russell Wilson made sense because it's poetic, and you are very into Russell Wilson.
Am I very into Russell Wilson more so than you're into Geno Smith?
Well, that's why I asked you if you wanted to take the bets. We could find out.
Know.
Oh my God, are you new? Are you like new at life?
Reasonable?
Oh my God, we'll talk about this off air. This is absurd.
Oh my goodness, Geno Smith was like, wow. You know what? I may stand corrected. He had a 0.086 EPA per play. Is that good?
It's okay, but his PPOE was off the charts.
Quarterback 17 or 18.
And what was his EPA CPOE composite?
You told me CPOE doesn't matter because Teddy Bridgewater was good at it.
That's not what I said.
Oh. He's number 7 when you add them together.
Number 7. He also... What?
Well, I'm just going to go back a couple of years and see where Teddy wound up because I'm pretty sure he was high.
Yeah, I haven't. I think one of the big differences in why I'm buying into the Geno stuff more, before you interrupted me, is when you do look at a lot of the film-based quarterback analysts, they've never been all in on a lot of these kind of guys who light up a lot of the advanced stats that the general community at large is more skeptical of. You're never finding Jimmy G film stands, Teddy Bridgewater film stands, but pretty much to a man, anybody whose job it is to watch quarterbacks on film and give takes of them, people are in on Geno as a legitimately good quarterback, and I'm inclined to believe them. I think you watch him play, he looks legit to me, much more than a Jimmy Garoppolo did, and his situation is so good that he's going to get carried. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jack Smith, and Jigba, I think is really solid. I'm in on Geno. I get that it was the 1 year. I think it's pretty likely he's just a league average quarterback or a little bit better. And that's great.
League average quarterback.
Right. And if you're a league average quarterback with the best weapons in the league, then you're going to be better than league average.
Huh.
He's even priced like a league average quarterback. And he has DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett. Also,
Drew Lock can come in at any moment.
Yeah, I'm sure.
All training camp, all we heard was this is a wide open competition. Drew Lock is just as good as Geno Smith.
You'd rather have a base first than DK Metcalf. I get that the impact of the hit might be higher.
Yeah, I definitely rather have a base first than DK Metcalf at this point, I think.
I mean, DK Metcalf was wide receiver 12 in expected fantasy points per game this year. His target share has been 25.5%, 27.3% over the last couple of years. I don't think he's ever going to be a top 5 wide receiver without running really hot, but I think he's a good player. You have to get pretty fortunate. You have to get pretty fortunate in the first round of a rookie draft to draft a player that's going to carry the level of trade value that DK Metcalf took.
Yeah, DK Metcalf's wide receiver 10, wide receiver 20, wide receiver 24 the last 3 years. I'd certainly rather have
you zoom into the profile
first than that.
Yeah, strong disagree.
Because you like fringy nothingness wide receivers that don't help.
Because what's the point? I can trade DK Metcalf for something that gets me closer to a legitimate scoring ceiling a lot faster than I can trade that first. I can use DK Metcalf. I mean, I don't actually roster him in Dynasty, but if I did roster DK Metcalf,
sounds like you should.
I should not. I actually would be more interested now. His price has come down a little bit since the JSN thing, which is reasonable. Not in redraft. He still goes at the 2-3 turn. But I think you can get if you can use DK Metcalf. He goes in a similar range like Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp. I don't think you're trading a singular future first for Cooper Kupp, but you could do DK Metcalf in a little bit. You get Cooper Kupp quite a lot more conceivably.
Yeah, I would happily trade DK Metcalf to get Cooper Kupp. That sounds like a great deal.
Right. So then why would you trade him for something that you can't trade to get Cooper Kupp?
Because I like draft picks because they don't get hurt and they don't score points.
Yeah, you want to avoid scoring points lock off.
I'm sitting here thinking, what would I rather have? A player who's probably not going to score enough points to make an impact in my team, or a draft pick that could be Caleb Williams, or could be a late first, and which I'll probably get another top 24 wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes both ways almost. Would I trade my draft pick for DK Metcalf? No. Would I trade DK Metcalf for a 24 first? Also no. I think it's just the opportunity of how to use that.
Just like a guy in the league who doesn't want to trade anyone.
No, it's a matter of there are only so many draft picks, right? So using your own first in a trade is like a bullet you kind of only get to fire once. So I want to use that bullet.
Let's say you have a stacked team. You have a stacked team. So your first is late. Or you get somebody else's first, and the first is late. In your heart of hearts, it's a late first. You're not.
For sure, I would easily trade that for DK Metcalf, but I would probably try to trade it for something else. I guess if my only two options in that scenario are trade this late first for DK Metcalf or hold this late first and make a pick, I would much rather have DK Metcalf. But
I'd be into that.
I would probably. But again, these firsts are a very finite resource. And they're the most liquid currency you have. So I kind of want to trade them into something more interesting. But at the same time, that you're just losing in the market if you trade Metcalf for a single first.
You're like, the first is extremely liquid and extremely rare. And you're like, but I don't want it. I'd rather have DK Metcalf, who only I don't even know who's buying DK Metcalf. There's no team that I can think of that wants to buy DK Metcalf. Good teams don't want him because he doesn't score enough. Bad teams don't want him because he isn't young enough. So who's buying DK Metcalf? I don't even know.
I think anyone's diving DK Metcalf. I haven't seen him traded in a long time.
I haven't either. Now that we've brought this up.
Trade finder.
So I think if you were to ask me, do I want a base first, which could be early or late, I would roll the dice and hope that it's an early first. And if it's late, so be it. I'll take that first and move it for something else that's going to be a top 24 wide receiver.
If my team is taking, I would be interested in that. Although I probably wouldn't, just because I really think I can get a better offer than that for Metcalf.
What are you going to get? Nobody's buying him.
First and a second.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, I'm.
Well, ideally, in the scenario where I have Metcalf and I'm competing, then I probably would be looking to get Cup or Diggs or Hill. I'd be looking to a team that is there's always a couple teams in every league where there's a guy whose team is bad, but he does never want to rebuild through picks. His base setting as a player is I hate draft picks. Rookies could be anything. So that when they rebuild, what they want to do is they want to just buy a bunch of young players. And that's bad. That's not how you could do it. But that's there's always going to be that manager. So I would try to find that manager and hope that they have a Cup or a McCaffrey or a Diggs or whatever else. And then I use Metcalf to go and get one of those elite veterans.
Okay, so let's break it down into much more simpler terms than the world is our oyster, we can have whatever we want, or DK Metcalf, to you have to have a base first or DK Metcalf. Those are your only options.
Right, so we're in a snake draft, and every first is available in the league, and you don't know whose first you're getting, so they're just randomly assigned firsts.
Exactly.
And you can either draft a first or you can draft DK Metcalf.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to hold this for the next 4 months, or can I then just make another trade?
I don't know. Whatever you want. You choose.
Okay, well, in the world where I can just make another trade, I'm going to take DK Metcalf. In the world where I have
Isn't the draft pick more tradable than DK Metcalf?
Don't think so. No, disagree. More tradable. Okay, more tradable. Yes. Higher ceiling of return. No. More tradable as in if I walk.
You don't think it has a higher ceiling return? If you end up picking a base first, and that base first guy, you hold it for 4 months, he tanks.
Yeah, no, massive higher ceiling. No, yes, higher ceiling on the asset. But I'm saying if I wake up today and I have a first, well, in this scenario, it's a real league, so it's probably not a base first. So let's say it's a mid first team that's kind of on the fringes. I have that, and I have Metcalf. I wake up today determined to move the first. I have a better chance of moving the first. But I wake up today determined to get the best possible return, and the only two things I can move are either Metcalf or the first. I think I have a higher chance to get more for Metcalf than I do the first. But I might not be able to get anything for Metcalf at all. Because I walked up to anybody in the league, I said, do you want a first? The answer is always yes. What will they give me? I don't know. I think if I find someone who's interested in buying Metcalf, I'm going to get a better return than I'm going to get out of that first. But I might not find anybody interested in buying Metcalf at cost. It would be more dependent.
Let me give you some real trades for DK Metcalf. You ready?
All right, let's hear them.
DK Metcalf in a second, 2024 second, we're assuming base.
Yeah.
For T. Higgins and Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, that's a way better thing than you could get for a first. That's awesome. I love that trade for the Higgins
That's
Lockett.
Incredible. Play. I would happily trade my DK Metcalf in a second for T. Higgins and Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, well, I would if I could trade a second for Tyler Lockett in every league I'm in, that's probably my favorite trade on earth. It's just trading a second for Tyler Lockett or Keenan Allen. And then Yeah. Also, sure, I'll take Higgins instead of Metcalf for free. I'll take 3 years younger DK Metcalf.
Okay, DK Metcalf for Brock Purdy, Devin A. Chain, and John Mechie. So basically, Metcalf for Purdy.
Okay, if that, I strongly object to you rendering A. Chain to an Afferman to an also ran in this trade. I mean, that's like such a goofy trade because I think that the value is pretty even, but it's just like stupid to like take one asset that's worth roughly a first and like devolve it into 3 things.
That also,
I don't think like the value's bad. I also wouldn't do that trade either way. Like if I was trying to bundle up Purdy and A-Chain and Mechie, I would try to bundle up for something more interesting than Metcalf. But if I have Metcalf, I wouldn't be like, how can I trade him? Well, I need to get 3 guys.
You're like the most difficult person to ask a simple trade question. Which side? I don't want either side of that trade.
Yeah, because if I had either of those assets, I wouldn't do that trade. It's true.
Okay.
Either side.
Here's a much simpler one. DK Metcalf for Zay Flowers and Rondale Moore.
DK Metcalf. Clearly.
That's a first and a second. That's your trade you were asking for. First and a third?
Well, Zay Flowers is a shitty first, right? Like that's the bad end of the base first. That's if you take the base first and it doesn't go so well, you end up with Zay Flowers.
Okay, DK Metcalf. This is the last
Although
one.
Funny enough, I actually did a pretty similar deal to that, so maybe I shouldn't knock it as much because I actually traded Christian Watson for Zay Flowers and Sky Moore the other day.
Oh, nice. Okay, so pardon me. DK Metcalf and Nico Collins, so basically DK Metcalf. For Daniel Jones, a third, and a fourth. So basically DK Metcalf for Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I would rather have DK Metcalf than Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
I don't know how lucky you are trading a first for Daniel Jones these days. Not that I've tried, to be clear. I've not offered that, but people are loving Daniel Jones.
I cannot even.
You got any more?
Do I have more? Yeah, there's lots. DK Metcalf in a first for Bryce Young.
Can I say neither again?
No, it's like the worst radio ever. You're like, let's make this show as boring as possible. I have no opinions.
What would you do in that scenario?
I would take probably Bryce Young.
Ew. Talking about low ceiling. You're taking your first and you're taking DK Metcalf and you're taking Bryce Young.
Yeah, I mean, because like I'm not gonna keep Bryce Young, but I think I can get Bryce Young into like I don't know. I feel like
right, so
maybe this is wrong. You make more trades than I do. Maybe I'm wrong. I feel like I can take Bryce Young and get into Kyler Murray a lot easier than I can DK Metcalf for first. What's that?
Is it so hard for me to say? I play in 62 leagues. I have 0 shares of DK Metcalf and 1 of Kyler Murray or 1 of Bryce Young. So I really am not the person to ask.
I'm more just asking in a general sense, not in like this particular 2 players. I just mean like if I want a quarterback, I feel like I can get a quarterback with a quarterback easier than I can with a wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean it always depends on the person. I mean the only issue with people selling Kyler, it's
honestly the Kyler, just a quarterback. I want Lamar. I want Deshaun. I want Patrick Mahomes. Like I feel like I can't get one of those unless I'm giving back a quarterback. So
okay, well you probably do need to give a quarterback. I agree. It's very difficult to buy a quarterback without a quarterback.
So then in this case, I'd probably spend a little premium to get Bryce Young and then take my Bryce Young and go get a real quarterback that's going to score fantasy points.
Yeah. The only thing that I found is like I found that this whole so I don't really have a lot of Bryce Young, but I did end up with like a decent chunk of CJ Stroud just because he was so frequently like the guy that was there at 1-6, and so I would just take him. I found that like trying to do Stroud for other quarterbacks and add the plus that would make sense with ADP was impossible. Where it's like, I get it. I guess when people are doing a startup and they're like, I need my quarterbacks, like the idea of like a really young quarterback is appealing. But when you already have Lamar Jackson, you're like, I don't want to give up 10 points per game this year. It's like less appealing. Where I did have success moving Stroud was moving him for not a quarterback, right? Was going to a team that had like long-term quarterback strife. Like maybe their QB2 this year was Baker Mayfield. And they're like, I don't know, that's going to work out. And they were like, the idea of just having that second stable option is appealing. And then getting like, I don't know, a running back and a first or whatever else with Stroud. That I could do.
Metcalf in a first.
Yeah, like that kind of potential deal. That's not what I did, but that kind of possibility was possible. The only issue is like most of my teams that was fine because I wasn't usually taking Stroud for need, but there was some teams where I was like, I do need a quarterback, so I would move Stroud, but I don't want to move Stroud for not a quarterback. And then I've just found myself kind of boxed in.
Yeah, I could see that. I think with Stroud,
I bet you can trade Stroud for Geno in a first.
Gross. Absolutely not. See, Geno needs to be good at football for the first time in his life before I'm going to buy in.
First, okay, this is all
right. Anyways,
I have the Seahawks projected very well, by the way. For I know we got a little off track by the end, but I have Geno 18.7 points per game. I have 14.3 on DK, 13.8 on Lockett, and 11.3 on JSN, which leaves for a lot of contingent upside for each of those if one of them should befall an injury. For the haters and the losers that are curious, I have a really shitty projection on Kenneth Walker. I have 12.3 points per game. I'm sure he'll beat that and smash my face in, but that is what it is.
I think that you're probably projecting the Seahawks too strongly because their quarterback sucks, and I don't think you took that into consideration.
I'm glad that you have Geno slander on air. I don't think that the 2023 season will be kind to the Geno slanderers.
You're projecting for, wow, okay, 4,444 passing yards. How many do you have last year?
I'm sure. I have their efficiency going up because his last year he kind of had a weird season where his completion percentage was absurdly high. Yeah. But his like yards per attempt was like pretty meh. I also think that adding JSN, they're gonna be in a spot where they're passing out of 11 a lot more. We're changing a lot of Will Dissly targets into JSN targets.
That sounds a lot like
he was 42.82 last year. So I'm projecting a little bit of improvement from that.
That's not much. It's pretty well in line.
No.
Shocking. Absolutely shocking.
All right. Where can people find you, Drew?
You can find me on Patreon. So come there.
you like Patreon, you're just like on Patreon.
Come and join the Discord, and then on Twitter at DFBeanCounter, and then also on YouTube. I believe that one's still set up as Bulletproof Fantasy Football. So come and find me in all those places.
Sweet. You can find me, of course, at Thinking About Thinking. That's jacobsanderson.substack.com. You can find me on Twitter at jacobsanderson. I will probably have my busiest writing week since the draft next week. This has been a kind of hectic week. I've been squeezing out the posts on projections, some ranking posts when I've had the chance between bar exam study, but I'll be wrapped up with that as of Friday. I'm going camping on the weekend, and then from starting next Monday, I'm going to be just trying to get out a post probably every couple of days. I'm going to have a post about Devontae Adams and why he's being incredibly disrespected, being drafted as the wide receiver 10 in seasonal leagues when only 3 total wide receivers have outscored him in the last 3 years. I'm going to have a post all about the Chargers and just how I've totally changed my mind on all their players after projecting them out. And I'm going to have a post about the really ambiguous backfields. I'm going to talk about the Eagles. I'm going to talk about the Bears. I'm going to talk about the Saints. I'm going to talk about the Dolphins. So excited for all those. Make sure subscribe to Thinking About Thinking. I also have the updated underdog rankings, I have fully updated dynasty rankings, and I will soon have fully updated redraft rankings along with the projections up there. Have a good night, everybody. Any last words? Any parting words?
I have no parting words. Bye. Oh no, I do. Wait.
Okay.
Buy Sky Moore. Well, unless he's expensive already, then don't do it.
I think if you want Sky Moore at this point, you're probably gonna have to pay more than you want. Like at this point, the hype train is so high that I don't feel like anyone's going to be like, yeah, I'll ditch him for a late 2. Like, I feel like people are either genuinely excited or they're holding out for something really good. I don't know. We'll see.
Anything's possible.
Anything is possible. All right. Have a good night, everybody, or morning or afternoon or whenever it is that you listen to this show.